Welcome to Soberly Speaking. I'm Julia Rangiheuea. Andrew grew up as a closeted Jewish gay boy, feeling immense pressure to be successful, marry a Jewish woman, have Jewish children, all while battling the belief that something was fundamentally wrong with him. To fit in, Andrew started using party drugs, masking his true identity and trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he was straight. Over time, his opioid use evolved into a secret crystal meth addiction. It wasn't until a trip to Costa Rica for his birthday, where he used ayahuasca, that everything changed. Today, Andrew helps other gay men struggling to come off drugs and chem sex, and when asked what advice he would give to a closeted queer person struggling with addiction, his response is not only beautiful, but deeply moving. Trigger warning, we discuss themes of substance abuse and sex in this episode. I hope you love this chat with Andrew. Andrew, what I love about stumbling across your content is how open you are, especially about more harder drugs. And I say that with quotation marks, and chemsex, which I have never heard before. Before we get into that, can I please hear about your childhood?
Yes. Okay. Okay, where do I want to start? So I guess I'll start what's relevant for today, which is sort of like my coming out.
Sure.
Yeah, and just sort of like understanding myself as like a queer boy, because I hope some of your audience might be queer, and it'd be really, really like refreshing to hear some of that story. But yeah, childhood was really, really great. I mean, like I had like a really, really supportive, and I still have supportive mum and dad. I've got a Jewish background, immigrant family from Eastern Europe, so very tight knit. And I think that played a role in my real difficulty coming out as well. I think there was a lot of expectations on me as a young boy to like marry a Jewish woman and have Jewish kids and just stick to the community, right? Really, really tight, especially the one in Melbourne is like a really tight community. And so I think growing up, I always, at least from the age of 6 or 7, always felt like there was something about me that wasn't right. And that's how I interpreted it myself. It wasn't like I was like gay and fabulous. It was that there was something about me that was like different to everyone else. And I really struggled with that. I really, really struggled with that. In my teenage years, I was actually reflecting on this recently. My teenage years, I spent just trying to be like really perfect. I was like, I didn't want to rock the boat. Mum always told me that I was like really well behaved, even from the age of like 7 or 8. And she's like, you're always so well behaved. And I'm like, for me, that's a red flag. I'm like, I obviously didn't feel like I could be myself. So in my teenage years, I was just like really well performing at school, pretty quiet. And then at the age of 18, it just all shifted for me. I left school and just became like a bit of a wild child. Sort of encountered like party drugs. I was still closeted at the time. And so I was really struggling with some like real internal battles of like real sort of self-loathing and avoidance of who I actually was, combined with like this sort of masking, performative, trying to prove to everyone that I was straight and I like chicks. So yeah, that sort of takes us through to like my early 20s. And that's sort of like my intro to drugs is definitely like partying at the age of 18. I guess I was blowing off steam from all my years. Yeah.
Can I ask, at what age did you realize you were gay?
That's such a complicated question.
Is it?
Yeah, because there's so many deep layers. Like there's evidence of it from earliest. Like I can remember times at 6 and 7 when, you know, playing with my male friends and being like very interested in what was going on down there, like playing doctor, you know, that kind of stuff. So like that exists, but it's sort of like this compartmentalization. And there's a few different types of coming out, sort of gay realization stories. There's sort of the people who are like 12 or 13 start to act on it, but then you stay closeted to your family. For me, I guess I could say that I was closeted to myself as well, in terms of I would never allow myself to go down that thought train. So, you know, I might watch gay porn, but then I would shut the laptop and just forget about it. Or I might be like in love with my best male friend at school, which I now realize I was literally just obsessed with all of them. But I just didn't let myself think about it anymore. I just didn't think it was an option. As I started the conversation around sort of growing up Jewish in like a really tight community, which I think you maybe understand is like, the expectations are quite high, especially on marriage and children. And so, yeah, I just didn't think it was an option for me. And so I'd never acted on it until I was 24. Until I was 24 years old, and all of a sudden I was already really stuck with drugs. I was like heavy into drug use. I was using opioids like Oxycontin at the time, really numbing myself out. And then finally it was just like one night and I was like, Andrew, you're gay. Just deal with it.
Were you high on drugs when you had this realization?
Probably, yeah. And then I remember sort of having this like moment where I'm like, oh my God, like, because I was really struggling. I was studying engineering at the time. I was always like a smart kid, always very, very smart. I could always get by without much effort. And yeah, I was studying engineering at the time. I think I was working in an engineering firm. I was really struggling with daily pharmaceuticals. I was just on pharmaceuticals all the time, benzos, opioids, whatever I can get my hands on. And this sort of like realization, it was just, as soon as I allowed myself to think it, it made complete sense. And I'm like, of course you are. Of course you are. It's not that bad. It's okay. Little did I know that was the start of a rollicking 15-year journey of like getting to know myself and undoing years and years of shame. So that was really the beginning of the journey. But yeah, 24 was when I finally sort of came out. I experimented, and then I was like, I had to experiment. So basically I had the realization, I'm like, I can't tell my mum yet. I'm like, I have to go and test out the water. So I downloaded Grindr, tested out the waters, and then I was like, okay, mum.
You're like, okay, I'm happy.
Yeah. I'm happy with my decision. I tested it out. Yeah, this is me.
Were you ever with a woman?
Yeah, many.
Oh yeah, so
many,
you just tried
many.
It wasn't.
I tried really hard.
Yeah.
I tried really hard. It actually caused a lot of pain and stress and hurt in me that I feel like I've been undoing in my 30s. I'm 37 now. A lot of like sexual shame, a lot of forcing myself to be with women. And then, so sex for me meant something completely different. Sex wasn't like something that was fun. So like it meant that all of a sudden there was this connection with like being found out. And so that's actually been like a journey of mine over the last 4 years, I would say, of really trying to remake my relationship with sex. And we'll speak in the future about the sort of chem sex, which you mentioned at the beginning. And like, that's also, there's a lot of complications around sex. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely was with women. I was with a woman when I came out. We were sort of like dating-ish.
Did she have any idea?
I think she might have had a small idea. I think the other thing was like I was so good at performing that like when I came out, it wasn't one of those ones where like, you know, one of my besties at the time, he came out 6 months before me. He's a sweetheart. We're still really close friends. He was one where he came out and everyone was like, yeah, you're the last to know. Yeah. For me, it wasn't the case. And I'm not saying that proudly. I'm saying that like my attempt to mask and perform was so strong, was top notch. And that's not something that it's not like I'm saying it proudly, but yeah, even my parents, like everyone was like, what? Maybe there was a few people in my life that maybe knew, and I'm like,
but you would have allowed them to see that, right?
Potentially, yeah. And I realized also like it's relayed. Like I was going to wear my new Kylie t-shirts. I went and saw Kylie Minogue.
Oh, is that why you were in town?
Yeah, no, that was last week. That was last weekend. Okay. Yes, but and I realized that like it really blocked my sort of engagement with pop culture. Like I didn't allow myself to like any kind of music. Like it really was full repression. And that's really for me, the impact of growing up closeted. I call it the queer trauma. It's like as part of my work, I call it the queer trauma because I work sort of exclusively with gay and queer men. And we all have a different variation of this queer trauma, which is just severe repression of like self and desire and want and need. So you become completely disconnected from self. So yeah.
Andrew, that sounds incredibly isolating. It actually sounds exhausting to try and pretend you're someone you're not for how many? 24 years to keep performing. Do you remember the first time you ever took a drug?
No, I don't have like a specific experience. I do remember the first time. It was always so linked to validation for me. That's the other thing. When you grow up closeted, you really externalize your source of self-worth and validation because you're basically saying that I'm going to try and interpret what you expect of me and I'm now going to perform accordingly. So it means the only way you can be validated is really by someone telling you that's good, even though it's a fake version of you. So I do remember getting out of school and my friend that I mentioned that I spoke about before invited me out. He was like the cool kid at school and invited me out with all the other cool kids to go to like a nightclub in oh my God, it won't be relevant for your in Hawthorne. It won't be relevant. It was like a really tacky like Thursday night college night. And I remember that. And then I remember like taking some pills there. And
this was like ecstasy or MD?
Ecstasy, yeah. And I remember that being like the first sort of introduction. And then I got really into like partying. But I don't have like a moment. I do remember the first time I tried, prescription pills were really my jam for a long time. And they definitely allowed me to feel like, because you can only imagine the amount of sort of internal chaos, which I understand now, because like my current life would understand the amount of like anxiety and stuff that would be living in my body would have been overwhelming. And so I think that's why benzos and opioids came into my life. And really, I did fall in love with them because at the time it was helping me ease a lot of the tension inside of me.
How did you get hooked on that? Was it like you just took it once because it was going at a party? Because I hear a lot of those stories, especially with prescription drugs, and it's like either after a birth or a car accident or something. How'd you get hooked on them?
Yes. Okay. So this is a very personal story. So basically, someone in my family was using prescribed for decades opioids, and I gained access to them in my home. And so it was something that I was very, at that age, I was about 22. Me and my friends, I was just so gung-ho. I really didn't give a fuck. I just didn't really care. I was closeted. I was just like fooling around. I didn't really care about my health. Like, I mean, a lot of young 20-year-olds, but I was like, I guess, an extreme version. So I was very explorative with drugs and I really didn't care. And I was also like too clever for my own good because like I thought that with me and my friend, we were both like clever. Like he was starting to be a physio, I was starting to be an engineer. So I'm like, we can research our way and find a way. You know, you try and like, you think you're too clever by half. So it was kind of that situation. And like, I remember us just like pushing the boundaries. And eventually after a long night out, you know, recoveries. And I'm like, hey, I think I've got these pills upstairs. Should we give them a go? And that was sort of the start of it.
You loved it.
And what was crazy is that there were actually three of us. We were like three besties. We used a lot of drugs together and all three of us got fucked with opioids for years.
That was the hook.
That was the hook. And we all had very different journeys. But yeah, I know we sort of lost contact, but I know that we all had our own real severe battle with opioids after that.
At your worst, how many are you taking?
So just for context, so the opioids lasted for about 4 years, so 22 to 26, and then it was replaced with crystal meth from 26 to 30. So I've had like both experiences.
Yeah.
And we might even talk about that because even though they're like literally opposite drugs. Like,
yeah, let's talk.
They're like opposite drugs. People find that confusing sometimes. So I think it might be relevant to talk about that. But at my worst, it was like a daily, obviously like with opioids, you become physically dependent. So daily, I think my worst time was when I was trying to be an engineer. And I'd have to wake up in the morning, roll over, snort drugs, and then pause my alarm for half an hour, get out of bed. That kind of situation. Like very heavy usage, and then really bad withdrawals when I didn't have.
What was your personality like when you were using this much? Because you said you had it all together. The mask was tight.
Yeah.
Did you let it slip?
I was a mess. I was a mess. Let's be honest. I really see that period of my life. Like I have my current period of my life, which I think lasts. I've been through so many rebirths, as you know. Like there's just like rebirth when you're in recovery. It's just like rebirth, and it's like really exciting. But also that is like 10 lifetimes ago now. I feel like I was a shadow of my current self. If that version met me now, it'd be like a 5%. It was just, I didn't know anything about myself, living in huge shame. I think shame is the word in the queer. I mean, I think shame exists everywhere, but I think in the queer world, shame is really the word. It's really about this feeling of like deep unlovability, feeling of not being good enough, sort of like feeling fundamentally flawed and all of that. So before I had any self-awareness, that just kind of runs the ship. And so it was basically all a mask.
Yeah.
I would say 95% mask.
And I think once you're used to operating at 5%, you lower the bar and you think, oh, this is normal, you know, and then suddenly you introduce crystal meth. Do you want to talk about that? Yeah,
sure. So what ended up happening was after at the age of 26, everything got unmanageable with the OxyContin and the opioids. So I ended up going to a clinic. It was in St Kilda here locally to where I was living at the time. And they were great. It was like not a rehab center. It was like just a doctor's clinic, and they would prescribe like pharmacotherapy replacement, like methadone and Suboxone. And so I went there to get some help. And she was really sweet, the doctor.
And sorry, what age were you when you did
26.
this? Okay.
26. So this actually is relevant for my work now, because what ended up happening was they gave me a drug to help prevent withdrawal. Great, right? But what was unaddressed and unassessed was the actual reason I was using drugs in the first place, right? And so I'm a big believer, like my core philosophy is that like drugs coming into our lives, substances coming into our lives to serve a purpose. And until we identify what that purpose is, they're always going to be some sort of presence. That's what I posit, my hypothesis. And then we go about healing those parts of you. And that's how I sort of approach my work now. But at the time, I was offered a pill to prevent withdrawals, but I was never offered any sort of deeper layer of like, well, what's like, I'd come out 2 years earlier. There was clearly like so many layers in me of shame and self-loathing and self-criticism and all that kind of stuff, but it was never addressed. So even though that drug was out of my life, my desire to numb and escape was just as strong.
Thriving, yeah.
And I was like, well, what's the other big drug I can do? And so crystal meth literally entered probably a month or two later. So I didn't even really have much of a reprieve in between.
Do you remember the exact moment you took crystal meth?
I don't have like a romantic, I just think that I was so, like, again, I didn't know who I was. Yeah. I didn't know how I wanted to be in the world. I didn't know how to relate to people. I felt awful about myself on all these deep layers. I was wearing a mask, so I was like so disconnected from any sort of authenticity that like it just made sense to just continue using hard drugs. So it wasn't like a love affair with crystal meth. I hear a lot of like stories of guys who, you try it for the first time. You're like, oh my God, felt powerful or confident, whatever it is. I didn't have that. It was just another attempt to escape from the realities of my head and brain and body and life.
Were you dating during this time? Because I could imagine that being quite a hard drug to hide from someone.
I was dating. I had a boyfriend. The whole time. I was with him from 24 until 30. So this crystal part of my life, the crystal part of my life was very in the shadows and very dark for me. I think that I'd gone to the point where with my OxyContin usage, I was open somewhat. My parents knew, my friends knew. I was clearly going openly to go and get this replacement therapy. I was going to the pharmacy. You have to go to the pharmacy every day, and then you have to go every week. So it was open, and I was kind of, it's nice to be in the open. But then when this crystal meth came in, I was like, this is not, I now have to keep this a huge secret. So no, I used for 4 years alongside a partner. We even lived together for a time, and it was a complete secret. Whenever I've shared this story on TikTok, and every comment is like, he fucking knew. And I tend to agree. I agree. And he did find paraphernalia sometimes, but in my head, I was like, no one is going to know about this. So I was alone, completely alone. Not one person in my life knew about it.
How does that actually look when you're living? Like you wake up, where are you using it? Where are you hiding it?
It's very much bathroom, and then covering it up by making noises, like shower on using, toilet flushing using, like that kind of, it's that kind of arrangement. It's not a pleasant way to be living life. I'll say that much.
I can't imagine your personality being similar to that when you wake up and then you go to the bathroom and you come out and you're on crystal meth. What is the difference of personalities? Like, what were you like on crystal meth?
What was I like the whole time? I feel like I was just a shadow of myself. Yeah. I just wasn't, I was so caught up in, and I say this a lot, I get some guys that come to me have gone to the point where they're now more open with their families and friends, which I think is a really powerful place to be in recovery. And then some people come to me where it's like still a complete secret. And I think that the shame that is laden when you're keeping such big secrets, especially from people that you really do love and that really do care about you, it's just debilitating. And it's basically the only thing that's on your mind. And it makes it so hard to be any version of like vulnerable or authentic or meaningfully connect. So yeah, I think I was the same way. I was just sort of preoccupied with like, la-di-da-di-da. I guess I'll just like play act. It was all very play acting. I feel like I spent most of my life play acting until like the last few years of my life, where I've actually just stepped into myself and stepped into my power. but it was a long process. So yeah, during that time, I just it was just play acting. I guess I'll play act like I am on meth, like I'm not on meth. What does a usual person do in a day? Like that kind of, it's much more of like.
How does a normal person act?
How does a normal person act? Yeah. That was a big, you know, you must know what that's like, but it's like when you sort of like first enter recovery, you're like, what do normal people do again? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were you just in such a world of shame and hurt and isolation that you never thought, what would my life look like if I didn't be doing this stuff? Was it like, this is the drug that is actually, it's almost like protecting me. It's actually, you know, safeguarding my heart is being on crystal meth.
Yeah, I always saw it as like my safety net. And I think a lot of people see their substance of choice in that way. It wasn't even like, I guess I had spent so much of my life up to that point, masking, performing, and then using drugs to sort of like keep it all at bay. They're like, I didn't really entertain what my life would look like without. I didn't think it would be possible. I wasn't even that interested. My mum would constantly offer me like, she's like, do you want to go to a counselor or a psychologist or like, and I was like, no. I just didn't visualize it. I actually had no connection to it. I really got so lost. And that the crystal meth period was very isolated. It was very me alone. I already said that I didn't share with anyone in my life. It was just me sort of like receding from the world and becoming, the term like desocialized, like really desocialized. Anytime I'd have to go out, it would be like the most overwhelming experience. Like I was very, very housebound at that time as well. So yeah, you just get so used to it that it wasn't even, I used to look at other people. I think we said this before. You'd be like, how are they? What is going on here? Like, what is this? You're living a day? It's like so foreign. So yeah, I was very, very far from that.
Andrew, did you have in your eyes an ultimate rock bottom?
I think that I was living in a rock bottom for quite a while, actually. I was in a position where I was, my floor was not that low. My floor was still me with a roof over my head. Because my parents were willing to support me for a time, even when I was unable to work for about two years. I'd help my dad at his work. He has a business. So I would go and sort of help out. And as a result, I'd get money. But it was very sort of haphazard. My floor was always like, I was always going to have roof over my head and have food. So my rock bottom, I think, sort of went on for quite a while, I would say. The only thing that changed it all was my dear mother, who, following her intuition and her gut, took me for my 30th birthday, and it was her 60th, I think, to Costa Rica to do ayahuasca with her.
I need to know everything about this.
So this was the turning point for me. This happens at 30 years old, and this is really the start of my now 7-year recovery journey, is a really powerful psychedelic experience in Costa Rica.
Before we get into that, you touched on it then, and I've always kind of thought this about the queer community, especially in Sydney, that I see, and I've seen it on one of your videos. It feels as though, looking from the outside in, that a lot of queer people are reluctant to seek help because they're very successful in their professions. They have a lot of money. They've got all the materialistic things in the world. Was that one of the barriers that was stopping you? Because I just heard you say it then that, you know, you had a roof over your head, you were getting some sort of income. Did that ever stop you?
It's a tough one. I think it's a really tough one. I think there's two. My cohort, the cohort of people that I look after now, it's quite a different cohort. It's people who are like very much successfully, like professionally successful. And you must have seen the video I made, which actually the response was like pretty wild. And like I ended up getting a number of clients off of that because they're like, how the hell do you know me so personally? In that one, I was describing sort of like the professionally very successful sort of gay man who works high up. But I mean, what's interesting is the reason that they have progressed so far is because of this like insatiable drive for validation and approval, right? So you end up sort of like overextending yourself, and then personally you're sort of like allow yourself to almost like your relationship with yourself becomes sort of like secondary, tertiary, fourth, fifth in line, and your relationship with like sex and hooking up, and then also career becomes like primary. So yeah, I think the rock bottom in that sense looks very different. For me, I guess how would I describe it? I wasn't professionally successful. I was not working at all. Nothing about me I wouldn't have considered myself to be successful, but I guess there was no like bottom that I was going to fall to. But then, I'm very close with my mum now, and like we talk about this stuff, and it's like, what other alternative? Like I wasn't going to let you live on the street.
Yeah, right. You just weren't homeless yet.
I wasn't homeless, yeah, but she's like, I was never going to let that happen.
Yeah.
Like, and she even said that sometimes she got advice from like kind of like much more like hardline friends of her. I don't even know if it was friends or people that she would speak to who were like, no, you have to like cut him off. And she was like, absolutely not. That's my son. So, which I respect, but it's also hard because it's like, how do you balance allowing someone to feel the impact of but yeah, I'm not a tough love person. I'm like a love person. I'm a love person because I think that ultimately a lot of us come to drug use, or at least in my cohort of queer people, like it's deep shame, it's unrelenting self-criticism and self-judgment, it's self-loathing. So what they really need is compassion and love. They don't need more. They don't need more to feel like they're not doing well enough. They actually need to be shown that they are beautiful and whole as they are. Yeah.
I want to get to your clients and the beautiful men that you work with, but I need to hear this ayahuasca story. Okay. I'm all for this. Okay. So don't skip any details. Okay. So you rock up there in the plane. What's next?
Okay. So first my mum, I even remember where we were. We were at a cafe in Richmond, and she's like, hey, how do you feel for your 30th birthday if I take you and I to go to Costa Rica to do ayahuasca?
Sorry, can I just ask, is your mum like really spiritual?
Yes.
Okay, this makes more sense because that's not the average mum present for a 30th.
No. She's really spiritual. She also is strongly connected to her intuition. And when she gets a message, she's like, I got to do this. And I really respect her because what a brave thing to do. She had to convince my dad that your son, who's been struggling with drugs for his whole life, I'm going to go and get him to take some more drugs to try and fix the drug problem.
In a foreign country in the bush, yeah.
And so she wasn't getting backed up by anyone in her life, but she just felt a calling that she had to like take me to do this because this is somehow I was going to receive some sort of healing that I wasn't able to receive otherwise. So yeah, I remember her asking me and I was like, we talked about it all the time. She's always like, you should have seen your face. Like, because it was just so, I think for me, whenever she would be like, do you want to see a therapist? Do you want to see a psychologist? Do you want to go to like a group meeting? And I'm like, I could just, no part of me wants to do that. I just feel, but when this came across, for some reason, it sort of sparked something inside of me. I was like, oh my God, like maybe there is something here. I was already definitely at approaching 30, sort of getting quite fed up with my usage. I was definitely in like a healthier place. I was in a much more receptive place to sort of starting my recovery. But yeah, so when she offered it to me, I was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, so it was a 7-day retreat. It was planned to have like 4 ceremonies. It was sort of one of these like New Age where it's like very fancy. It's like you're staying at like a resort, like nice, it's all really beautiful. You're not in the jungle.
Okay.
You're like in a beautiful resort. And so we went there. I was meant to be off drugs for at least 2 weeks beforehand, like as a detox, which I tried to do, but I just couldn't do it. I think I got off some of my drugs, but ultimately ended up using crystal the night before we left, which I only told my mum like 2 years after. And she's like, you motherfucker. She's like, I wouldn't have taken you. And I'm like, exactly, you wouldn't have taken me.
Were you stressed? Sorry to keep butting in. Were you stressed that you couldn't use, you can't bring crystal meth to another country. Were you like, how am I going to do this?
Yes. But I think on a deeper level, I was actually really grateful for like finally there's some sort of impetus for me not to try not to use. So I think at the time I was probably using like, I've been on benzos like Valiums and clonazepams for like the whole time. So I think at the time I was on benzos, I was on crystal, and I was also on Suboxone, which is buprenorphine, which is the thing that I was prescribed to get off the oxys. Mm-hmm. So that was still around many, many years later. And so those were the 3 that I was meant to try and get off before I went away. And I think I don't know what I managed to get off. I think I managed to get off the benzos maybe. I tried. I really, really tried. It's just the night before I remember having to smoke a pipe just before I got on the plane. And we flew to LA. And then we rocked up we flew to Costa Rica after a few days. I remember being terrified because I thought I was going to get drug tested. Wow. But I didn't, thank God. But it was like the panic and fear and anxiety. I can't even imagine from my current perspective of like how tuned in I am to my body. I just can't even imagine what I was going through at the time without any self-awareness of what was happening. Mm-hmm. I just feel a lot of compassion for myself. but yeah, so it was meant to be 4 ceremonies, all guided by a shaman from Central South America. They bring the ayahuasca. So I don't know, how do you want me to tell the story?
Do you drink it and then you just like see things straight away? Because I've never done it, but I'm really interested.
Okay, it's incredible, by the way. I did it again last year. I went to Spain.
Okay, well, I have to get the details.
I went to Spain last year to an incredible place. So that was my revisiting, 6-7 years on, which was amazing because it was literally like a re-meeting.
Wow, because you would have been like, yeah, okay,
it's a new
self,
and
your more authentic self.
100%, and it's been crazy impactful for me. The one last year, I feel like my life since then has been expansive, much more expansive. It really allowed me to get in touch with some of the deeper layers that were like blocking me. But this first one was, I had no awareness. I didn't know anything. It was just coming out of the blue. So yeah, it's basically a drink. It's like this really thick drink. It's made up of 2 sort of sacred plants that grow in the Amazon. One of them is like a vine. I'm trying to get this right. One's a vine, one's a bark. Basically, in terms of like chemically, it's got DMT. One has DMT in it, which is a very powerful psychedelic drug. And then the other one is like it's like a neuroactivator, basically, that extends out the trip for a number of hours. And so these 2 together, and it's like an ancient medicine, like thousands of years old. They've been using it in like tribes in the Amazon. And so luckily, like there's places now where you can go and do it that like sort of have imported it, and they bring someone along to administer it as well. It's very ceremonial, It has to be done in the right setting. This is not something to fuck around with.
Like a party drug or anything.
No, you're serious. You tap into like deep layers. Up and down, up deep and then high. You know what I mean? Like all the layers. It's really incredible. It's got a feminine energy to it. It's like a feminine spirit. It's called Mother Ayahuasca. And Mother Ayahuasca sort of guides you through the trip and the journey. What's crazy though is the trip is done at nighttime. So it's done in the dark and you're not like walking around tripping. You are just lying in a bed. So you literally walk into this room. It's just mattresses on the floor. And then purging is a big part of it as well. So like you vomit from either end, for everything, purging. And so the way the room is set up when you walk in there, and it's like shocking the first time you see it. It's literally like you're in a jail. So it's like this big open area. There's like single mattresses on the floor, and then there's a bucket at the end of the bed
for either end. Yeah,
and then a toilet roll. Okay. And that's sort of how
so you've come from this swanky resort to this,
okay, this is real. This is really happening. And so for me, honestly, the first night, because I was I hadn't detoxed. Like you're meant to, in an ideal world, like the one I did last year, there's like a very rigorous diet that you end up going through to make sure you're receptive to receiving the medicine. At the time, I wasn't in any position to do that whatsoever. But what's incredible, nonetheless, is that first night, I had this incredible experience that really transformed me. I just want to like be clear to anyone listening. It's not like an instant. I didn't leave healed. I didn't leave
floating on air.
No. It allowed me to access something, which I will describe. I'm making you hold your breath. Allowed me to access something that I then, as that year progressed, it was 2018. As that year progressed, I returned and kept using drugs. I did, because you have to return to your old patterns. But it gave me, it was almost like a circuit break. It allowed me to have a different perspective on my life. And it was later that year that I ended up sort of using crystal for the last time as a result of this experience. So basically, I guess when I entered, my ability to observe myself and see myself from any perspective other than being in my shame and my criticism and my loathing was actually impossible. So I'd been living in my shame and my self-loathing for all these years until I was 30. And what this medicine allowed me to see in that first encounter was it almost allowed me to step back from myself and observe myself, but observe also the whole timeline of my life. And it put everything into context. And what it did is allow me to access self-compassion for the first time. At the time, I didn't have the word self-compassion. That's a word that I use now. But I just felt sorry for myself, actually. And I remember crying and being like, you poor thing. Look at all these things you've been through. And no wonder you're using crystal now and drugs and you find it really, really hard to be yourself. And so that sort of timeline and the ability to actually express emotion for myself, as opposed to being like, because the language that a lot of us drug users, it's like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
You're such a fuck up. Look at you. You can't get your shit together, right? So that is what I was lost in. And so for me to have the alternative of like, oh, you poor soul, honey, I'm here for you. I can really see what's happening. And I have a lot of compassion and actually feel really sad when I think about what you've been through. And that was life-changing and transformative for me to experience that.
Can I just say that meeting you today, that is the word that sticks out. Meeting you is compassionate. So do you think that you've just carried that for the rest of your life from that one experience?
There's been so the thing with psychedelics, especially ayahuasca, is integration is probably the most important part of the process, which is everything that happens afterwards. So you can have this like incredible experience, but it really depends whether you actively and intentionally integrate it into the way that you live. And I think for me, I was really gifted that experience. Like, I mean, how crazy for my mum to receive a message to like take me. It was all meant to be. And also to the point where like I didn't even prepare myself in the way that I was meant to prepare myself, but I was still delivered that one really, really critical lesson. And so throughout that year, I mean, I didn't really have access. I wasn't integrating intentionally, but what's happened, and this is something I only realized like a couple of years ago, which is exactly what you said, which is it basically forms the cornerstone of my philosophy around recovery, is this experience. And I run a program now, and I call it like, it's like a 12-week ayahuasca. Like I'm trying to deliver to the guys that come to me the same healing that I received in that ayahuasca trip, without having to administer ayahuasca, is the way that I visualize it. So yeah, it's really formed the cornerstone of the way that I view recovery. And I guess from what you're saying, like the way that I kind of live my life.
Yeah. Your work that you do today, obviously, you know, you were changed in those experiences, but it wasn't sudden. Like we said, we didn't float out of there and just suddenly become a recovery coach. How did you start your work now?
Okay, so in 2018, so this is the beginning of 2018 that I went to this ayahuasca experience, and then so I came back. I continued using, because you return back to your old patterns. You return back to your old apartment, the streets that you know, and all that kind of stuff. But what happened in that year is, as I started using, I really didn't like it. I really didn't like it. Different. Yeah, it just felt different. I was like, oh, this is so boring. This is so lame. Like, I have to go out and source drugs again. Like, well, I'm stuck in my apartment now, like doing, you know what I mean? Like, so everything that I used to do sort of, not even autopilot, like asleep, I guess, just without any lights on, I would just do it just to escape. I was sort of becoming self-aware in the moment. And so I got really fed up with it. And I was like, well, there must be something else for me. And I think also what this ayahuasca experience allowed me to access was a tiny bit of like self-worth, or like just a thing of like, maybe I deserve something different. It was the start of that. That's obviously been a huge part of my own journey. And that's also part of my coaching as well. Really, I think self-worth comes at the bottom of like all of recovery and substance use, in my opinion. And so, yeah, I think it gave me a little bit of like, well, what else is possible for me? And so it was sort of about midway through that year, a gym opened up around the corner from me in my home in Collingwood. And I was like, maybe I'll join the gym.
Do something crazy.
Yeah, do something crazy and join the gym. And I remember my mum, who we were actually talking about a few days ago, my mum was talking about the moment, because I remember reaching out to mum and dad being like, hey, would you like mind like buying me a gym membership? And they were like, yes, motherfucker, yes, like finally, you know what I mean? Like she was like expressing how excited they were that I was finally like taking some sort of initiative towards something that might be good for me. So yeah, I think early on, working out, it kind of replaced my drug use, as it does with a lot of people. It was a sort of like an unself-aware version, but still much healthier than using crystal. It was sort of like, how nice can I make my body, all that kind of stuff. I think it relayed into like a whole other journey that I've been on around like, I ended up building like quite a muscular body, getting abs, and in the gay world, it's very, it's currency. And so that became very intoxicating as well, the validation through like dating apps and hookups and stuff like that. So that's a whole other journey that sort of started at that point. And now I've had to like work my way through that, but it was healthy. It was healthier than me doing crystal. And then I remember my last time using was sort of 3 months. I'd sort of stopped using, and then I came back to it. That's a whole story in and of itself. But basically, I met a guy. We were sort of hanging out at the gym, and he ended up coming over. we were making a friendship, and I was like really excited because I was so isolated when I stopped using crystal. I really had no one. And but he came over, and just naive little me just didn't really realize that he was using, and he brought it into my house. And so in that moment, even though I really didn't want to use, I wasn't thinking about using. But as you know, if you're like sort of presented with it in front of you, you're like, oh, okay, I guess so.
And on top of that, you were trying to make a new friend. You're trying to impress him.
Yes, you really tapped into the like how sad. It was a really, really sad moment because I was trying to just be open for the first time. But it's okay because this is like sort of my opinion of like, I'll use the word relapse even though I don't like the word relapse. I call them slip ups. I don't like slip ups. So this sort of last slip up of mine, it was really powerful. So, okay, I'll tell the story. So he came over. It's a bit of a trigger warning here for any of your listeners, but he came over and pulled out some crystal, and I was like, oh, damn. And he also pulled out a needle. And so I was never an injector. I was just a smoker. But for this one time, I was like, all right, I guess so. It just happened so quickly. And I was like, oh God. And it's but literally probably 5 or 10 minutes after he injected both of us, he started to enter like a psychosis, a really serious drug-induced psychosis. And I ended up spending the next sort of 8 or 9 hours with him in my apartment. I had to lock the door because he was inconsolable. He was like seeing things, hearing things, a full-blown psychosis. And so I looked after him for about 9 hours until the sun came up. And I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do with this guy? And I ended up taking him to hospital. I took him to the emergency. They were actually really, really kind, which probably depends what nurse you get, whether they're like, if I can do this to yourself. They were sweet, and they looked after him. I actually had found out that he'd actually been in there before for the same thing. And I was like, I don't like you right now. You're not my friend right now. And I ended up leaving, and it was just the pathway ahead of me was so clear. It was like, okay, so I'm going to the gym, I'm getting healthy, I'm meeting people, I'm finally feeling a little bit of pride about the way I'm living my life, and I can actually finally connect with people. So that's one pathway. Or it's like, down smoking meth and having people have psychosis around me. And that was the last time I ever used. It was the last time I ever used because it was so stark.
And isn't that so interesting? Call it God, call it universe, spirit, that you had already felt like this wasn't right. You said that even when you were using after that trip, that you didn't feel the same. You were like, dreading it instead of it being like this thing that you need to live. And then the one time it's put back in your face, it's like the worst experience. Yep. Isn't that just God, source, whatever? Yeah.
That's the gift. And it's always been my approach towards relapse or slip up or usage when you didn't want to use. I think they're incredible learning tools and incredible opportunities for growth. And you can actually, if you take them, and I always tell that story to anyone that might be going through it, because there's such a temptation to fall into like deep shame and self-loathing after using when you didn't intend to. But I think you can actually come out way more empowered on the other side if you have sort of like a process around it where the word I always use is curiosity. Just introducing some curiosity and some compassion and just trying to understand exactly what's happening in that moment and what led you down that path. You can come out the other side incredibly empowered. And I've seen it happen before my eyes where some guys will have like a slip up and they're like, I feel so, like I'll speak to them the next week and they'll already be feeling like in their power.
Yeah.
So like, I can see exactly what happened. I know what led me there, and I'm really excited to try next time and make a different choice. Yeah.
My partner had a lapse just from alcohol 11 months into our journey as a couple because we went sober together.
Oh, wow.
And that solidified his sobriety.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say everyone needs to lapse or everyone needs to have a relapse or a slip up, sorry. Everyone needs to have a slip up. But before that point, he'd always been like, I don't know, forever seems like a long time, and I don't know if I'll probably do at least coke again and he's quite young. That made me feel good. And then after he had that lapse, he's like, fuck, no, it was not worth it. So I'm not against it either.
You can really, what's the word? Like consolidate, but also like reinvest. Like it's almost like a reinvestment. It actually happened with a guy that I'm coaching just this week. He's like away on holidays. He hasn't been drinking he uses crystal, but he also hadn't been drinking for about 4 months. He wasn't like, I'm going to be sober forever. And then he went on holidays and he said he drank the first day, and I spoke to him the second day, and he's like, it was horrible. I didn't like who I became. And he's like, now I'm like super committed to like this holiday being a sober holiday, but not so the alternative is to like have this sort of like longing.
Yeah.
This sort of like, romanticized longing. Or if it does happen and then you really do prove to yourself again, actually, let me tell a personal story of this regard. So I got shoulder surgery just 4 weeks ago. And obviously you get prescribed painkillers. And this was like a big dilemma for me. And I'll be totally honest with you and your listeners that a part of me was kind of excited to take some painkillers again. It was going to be indone, so it's going to be OxyContin. And I haven't taken OxyContin for 7 years, probably 8 years. And so I got him to prescribe me the pain meds. And the first few days afterwards were really challenging for me because all of a sudden I was like reintroduced to this sort of like old experience. And like, I feel like I kind of reverted a little bit as well. It's like, and it's really jarring considering the work that I do now. But also if I hold like a larger frame for myself, basically I had like two or 3 days. I mean, I was in a lot of pain. So I did use the pain meds, but after like 2 days, I'm like, actually, you know what? I don't like how this makes me feel. I feel dizzy. I feel nauseous. I feel like out of it. I like being in my head now. I like being present. Mm-hmm. I've built a life for myself. It's not like far from perfect, but I built a life that I like participating in, with all the ups and downs. And so after 2 days, I'm like, Mum, take these away from me. I don't need them. I don't want them. And now I know that in the future, anytime that I, God forbid, have to have a surgery or I'll just say I don't want the pain meds. Yeah. But instead of it being like, oh, but maybe. The longing, I was actually happy with that experience. So it's nice to see that I'm actually living it out still. My philosophy, I'm still living out. And like, that was actually a valuable experience for me to have, not something that I was lamenting.
Mm-hmm. I need to start wrapping up the interview, but I've just realized we haven't even touched on chemsex. And I know that this is probably a huge topic, but I really need to talk to you about it.
Okay.
In my naivety, I had no idea that this was a thing. So chemsex, I'm going to take a stab in the dark. Is it using crystal meth and having sex and you get addicted to that feeling?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do people come to you and seek out support specifically for chemsex? Like, is it a big thing in the...
Yes. Yeah. So my cohort currently, the terms I use is crystal and chemsex. That's my sort of like tagline because TikTok is okay with those 2 words. You have to figure out what words TikTok likes.
Yeah. Chemsex with a G.
Chemsex, yeah. No, it actually is fine with chemsex. If it's like chem and then space sex, then it doesn't like.
But not together.
No, it likes it together.
Okay.
It doesn't like sex individually.
Yeah.
Sex individually, kind of, understandably. So, so basically it is the combination of usually stimulant drugs, and sex. But it's not as sort of simple as that. It's a whole like subculture in the gay world. And yes, all of my clients are basically substance users, and the way they come across substances and use substances generally is in this sort of format. That's why it's usually crystal meth, cocaine, not so much in Australia, but in America as well. And in the UK, it's a little bit, they have something different, like they use methadone and these different drugs as well. But it's basically stimulant drugs that is used alongside sex, but it's usually, and it's all wrapped up in like Grindr and hookup apps as well. It's like this whole overlay. This is sort of like a whole subculture. It's sort of available in any sort of major city, I know English speaking at least, in a major city around the world, like this sort of like subculture that you can really access and tap into if you know what to look for. And it's sort of a ready-made place of men wanting to have sex. And it's usually become something that's goes on for a long time. It usually turns into a bender. It's usually like 24 hours, 48 hours, multiple sex partners, sex parties. So that's sort of like the picture. And it's like, it's sort of this underground, but not that underground, very, very common, but not spoken about, taboo. And so I'm really the first person that has brought this up online on social media.
I would 100% agree. I had never, ever heard of it. Like I said, I don't know whether that's naivety or it's a subculture I've just never looked into. But reading your comments, people finally felt seen. So many men from around the world was like, thank you for talking about this. So you're doing God's work. I do want to end on one question because I think you would have an amazing answer. What would be your advice if there's a closeted Jewish boy living wherever, struggling with substances, holding up all of these masks, juggling this fake life? Do you have any advice for him?
Okay. I've actually never done that. I've actually never thought this or done this before. I think if I had access to it, like I do a lot of, inner child work. So I'm often in touch with my little inner self. And like, all I really want to do is like hug him and tell him that everything's okay and that there's nothing wrong with him. But in terms of like, that's more of like what I would do out of like a love expression. I think that if I'm to give advice, it would have to be that you have, in an ideal world, you let someone in. You have to let someone in. And that's like really confronting for me to say, because at the time I would have resisted that really heavily. But I think it's really hard to do it on your own. It's really hard to do it on your own. And I mean, in my case, I had people that genuinely loved me, that weren't going to judge me, but I felt so unable because there was so much shame. So I think that would be my advice, just to let someone in. And I think in the process of letting someone in, you end up having to drop some of the shame anyway, because you're letting someone in and just being like, hey, I'm really struggling and I can't hold this mask up anymore. And then ultimately it's a journey of really developing self-worth and getting more in touch with your authenticity and really developing a relationship with yourself. That's how I view recovery overall. It's developing like a really healthy and full relationship with yourself where you can hold yourself and make space for yourself at all times. So yeah, that's my long, short answer.
Andrew, I have loved this chat with you.
So
I want to
fun.
like do ayahuasca with you next year in Spain. Thank you so much for making time with me and coming on Soberly Speaking.
A pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been so nice to meet you. Really, really nice.